Welcome everyone. My name is Tom West with the Equinox team here. Um, I was a participant at the FACC conference, and I'm sure I had the pleasure of meeting some of you. Most of you probably not, but we thank you for joining us this morning. The session that we're about to go through is being recorded, so if you weren't able to attend or you have to leave the call early, we'll certainly provide a recording of the session. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Dan Tilletta, who is our lead sales engineer here at Equinox. Dan is heading towards 5 years with us and is really one of our experts in PDF accessibility. Not only does he lead the majority of our demos, but he also does our training sessions on the Equinox platform. One thing I had related to Dan as we kind of leading into this webinar today was, as I was talking with some of the folks at the conference, a number of them said that they had used Adobe's Auto Tagger, which is certainly fine. However, as I think most know, Adobe wasn't designed as a PDF accessibility tool, whereby that's really the sole objective of the Equinox platform, is to give you a tool for PDF accessibility and how to kind of work through that process efficiently. So Dan, certainly keeping that in mind, is going to show you some of those advantages that we offer. And at the conclusion of today, if you have the interest in going through a one-on-one demo, we'd be more than happy to support that. So just reach out to me and we can get that set up for you. So thanks again for joining. I'm going to turn it over to Dan and we're going to get started.
All right, great. Thanks, Tom. Is everyone able to see my screen and my mouse moving around? Or Tom, can you confirm?
Yes, looks good, Dan.
Okay, perfect. So thank you everyone for joining. As Tom was mentioning, today's webinar, it's not going to be so much a slide deck focus, but more so kind of covering the basics of the Equinox application and a little bit about PDF accessibility 101, if you will. Now, what we're looking at here on the screen is our Equinox PDF remediation software. The first thing I'd like to mention is the fact that it is a web-based application. Now, there's a lot of advantages to being web-based. We work with a concurrent user licensing model. So let's just say your organization purchases 10 concurrent licenses. That means any 10 people could be logged in simultaneously, working within your account in the Equinox application. The fact that it's web-based really allows for a lot of natural collaboration and teamwork within the application itself, because all of your documents and projects can be centralized right here in one location. Whereas if you're using a tool like Adobe Acrobat, those projects are very much siloed to the specific machine that you have that Adobe Acrobat license installed on. Whereas Equinox, you can log in and access your account from any computer, anywhere with an internet connection. You can even share documents and collaborate and work together with other teammates on the document that you're having trouble with. Maybe it's a high volume type of project, hundreds or thousands of pages. You're able to collaborate, communicate, and work together through the application because it is web-based. Now, what I have here is just a list of documents that have been loaded into the application over the various days, weeks, and months that I use for different trainings and demos. Today, I really want to focus just on 3 different documents. And the distinction between these 3 documents is that 2 of them are tagged and 1 of them is not tagged. Now, when I imported these documents to the Equinox application, Equinox is looking for things such as existing tag structure. Now, these 2 documents here, they have a little flag over on the right-hand side indicating that they were previously tagged. The document here that I'm looking at right now that my mouse is hovering over, this document was auto-tagged using Adobe Acrobat, whereas this document here that I'm circling now was actually tagged from a template within Microsoft Word. And then this document here had no existing tags. So everything that we're going to work on is going to be based on Equinox's auto detection. So I just kind of want to walk through the differences between the auto tagger versus template-driven tags. So documents that are having tags produced for them automatically based on the Microsoft Word or the Google Doc or the PowerPoint deck that the document, the source file is stemming from. So the first thing that Tom mentioned this at the very beginning, but Adobe is not an accessibility company. And Acrobat is not an accessibility tool. They do have the ability to edit and change and alter PDFs, which in turn gives them the ability to generate accessible documents. But it is by no means an easy process. And the auto tag feature is by no means a foolproof system for generating an accessible document. So we'll take a look at what an auto tag document actually looks like and how it kind of can actually impact an end user who is navigating that document with a screen reader. So if I click on this document here, that is going to isolate the document, and I'm just going to be looking at the document detail page. And this is a sort of a generic, average, run-of-the-mill PDF that we've created specifically for this reason. But I get one little preview here of the single page in this document. And then down below, I have some different properties about that document, which are not all that important at the moment. We're really going to be focused on the page editing process. Before I get too involved with the document editing, I do want to mention the Images tab. Now, the Images tab, what this does is it gives you a list of all of the images in the document in one location. This is a very handy part of the Equidox application because if you aren't aware, tagging images with an alternate description is a critical part of PDF accessibility. This also happens to be an area where Adobe's Auto Tagger will provide you no assistance. It's not going to accurately describe your images just because you press the Auto Tagger button. So if you have documents containing images that require descriptions, it's very important to make sure that you are taking the time to properly describe them so that a screen reader user has the appropriate context as to what this image is, what it represents, what is it doing in this document. Now, these are very generic. This is a very generic image, and then this is actually an image of text that we're going to cover. But what's nice about this Images tab is if you have a long document, if you have redundant, repetitive logos or background images, or if you have images that do require a description, you can see everything here in this consolidated list. So even if your document is 500 pages long, you can really figure out exactly what you're up against when it comes to tagging the images with a description. Now, I'm going to jump into the first and only page here and just kind of take a look at what we are presented with right away. Now, keep in mind, this document was previously tagged, and Equidox, when we import the document, is able to maintain those existing tags, and they are essentially converted into what we call reading zones. So these yellow boxes that we are seeing here placed on the page, this is the existing tag structure that came straight from Adobe's Acrobat's Auto Tagger. Now, these yellow boxes that we're seeing, these are generated by Equidox when the document is being imported. But there's a few things to note about them. So in the upper left-hand corner of each zone, there is a little green flag that will give you the zone type. And then in the upper right-hand corner, there's a green flag giving you the reading order of that particular element on the page. So if one thing to point out immediately, just by taking a look at this previously tagged auto tag document, is the challenges here with the reading order. So for example, if this document is read by a screen reader, the first element that's going to be read on the page is this up here in the upper margin. Then you'll have the image read next because of the height of that sort of the image itself. It will be found next in the reading order. But then you're going to move over here to the left-hand column, so the letterhead here for this Joe Smith person, and then it is going to jump across here to the right-hand side of the page and read this other person's name, Bob Jones. And then it's going to come back over here to the Joe Smith column and then jump across. So I think you can probably see the issue here where it's jumping straight across multiple columns and it's not going to read these elements in the correct order. You do not want to be hearing, Bob Jones's title directly after Joe Smith and vice versa. Another issue that's I'm immediately seeing is the fact that there is no proper heading structure in this document. This heading level 3 was automatically identified by Adobe's Auto Tagger. To start a document with the first heading being a heading level 3 is absolutely incorrect, and it will be flagged by every accessibility checker in the world. You need to have a heading level 1 to begin your document in terms of the heading structure. So you go from a heading level 3 to a heading level 2 to another heading level 2. We have a list here, which is currently just tagged as a text zone. You also have this table down here, which if you can tell, the column headers for the table are tagged with an H5, so a heading level 5 tag. And then you have the entire table below it just kind of grouped together as a clump of text. So you don't have to be an accessibility expert to understand that there are some serious problems with this quote unquote auto tag document, keeping in mind that Adobe's auto tagger is it's just trying to get you started in terms of creating tags, but a tag document does not indicate that those tags are in fact accessible. And that's really where Equidox comes into play. You can use the technology that Equidox has built into it to very quickly take a document like this and fix it and retrofit it to be accessible, to be fully usable. And it does not take that much time or that much training or that much experience. It's simply a matter of just kind of applying some basic logic and some basic point and click computer skills to work through the application. Now, the first step that I like to when I'm working on a document like this, where I'm not satisfied with the initial tag structure that I've been given, is I like to go over here to the Page tab, and I use this tool called the Zone Detector. Now, when I use this Zone Detector tool, I'm going to zoom out a bit. When I use the Zone Detector tool, I'm going to start ignoring the existing tag structure, and I'm going to allow Equidox to just redefine the page that I'm currently working on. So as I move this back and forth, left and right, you'll notice that the granularity of the reading zones will start to change based on however far left or right I slide over this slider tool. So the Zone Detector is really designed to just give you like the best possible starting point so that you don't have to make as many manual adjustments to the page itself. So right away, like what we've already fixed is the issue up here where Joe Smith and Bob Jones, they now have all of their title and their contact information. At least they are grouped together and they're no longer going to be jumping across the multiple columns. When we use the detection slider, the zones will reset to a text zone. So now it's my job as the remediator to make sure that I'm identifying the proper heading structure for this particular page. So the first things first is this big bold font at the very top of the page. I want to make sure that I am in fact setting this as a heading level 1. If you remember previously, it was set to an H3, which was just a randomly applied H3 tag to something that is in fact a heading level 1. So I can fix this. I can change this to a heading level 1 by simply tapping 1 on my keyboard, and that will update to an H1 zone. I want to make this what is lorem ipsum a heading level 2, and I can just also resize zones. So if I ever don't get the perfect detection level, I can simply resize a zone and draw a new zone in its place to recapture that text. So you have the flexibility to make manual adjustments or rely heavily on the sort of auto detection of Equidox, and then going through and making your slight adjustments such as the headings and reading order and lists and tables and those types of things. Down here, I'm going to set this as a heading level 2 as well. So I'm simply going to tap 2 on my keyboard again. I also have this list. So if you can tell, this is all just being clumped together as a single text zone. So all of these list items, if left alone, will be read as like a strange run-on paragraph. But we want to establish this as a list that has about 8 different items in it and make sure that the end user is aware of the relationship between these 8 separate items. So to fix this, I can simply press L on my keyboard to change the zone to a list. It now says L in the upper left-hand corner. And if I move my list detector from left to right, which will appear, you'll notice that the single list zone has actually been auto-detecting the individual list items because I moved that slider from left to right. So I've turned something that was just a strange run-on paragraph into an actual usable list for those end users. Now down below, if we take a look here at this table and the way it currently sits, it had a bunch of individual text zones sitting over the top of it, which is not ideal because with those text zones, the end user would be forced to just read this table in whatever order was provided to them through the reading order of that page. We really want to make sure that this is tagged properly as a table. So if I just draw a zone over the entire table, press T on my keyboard and open up the table editor, what I will see is I get the table isolated for myself. And I have these green grid lines, which I can move around freely and change their location, change the quantity of rows and columns if needed. But I also have this table detection slider. So this is using artificial intelligence and machine learning to better understand the cell structure of this table. So as I move these detection sliders around, Equidox is able to pick up the rows and the columns, and it's able to break up the data for me, and it will automatically produce a nice, clean, usable table, which I can see over here in an HTML preview. With that said, I should also mention the fact that we do have this preview feature in Equidox, which is a critical part for checking your work. So a lot of people will just rely on the accessibility report coming out of Acrobat to say that something is a passing grade or not. But within Equidox, we have this button here that looks like a computer monitor. And when you press this at any time, what you'll see is an HTML preview of the page that you're currently working on. So you're able to do things like checking your reading order, checking that your list is properly structured, checking out your tables, making sure that everything is sort of built the right way for that particular page. Now we have a couple of things to adjust still. I want to set break lines for these contact informations for Joe Smith and Bob Jones. I also have this image here of text. If you can tell, this is just an image that has text inside of it. As it currently sits, this is not something that is readable or usable to a screen reader because an image is just an image. The screen reader does not know exactly what this image is. It is simply just looking at this as a figure. It's called a figure tag, and what is inside of it is up to me, the remediator, to establish. Now I can visually see that this has text inside of it. So what I want to do is I want to use a technique called OCR. So if I hit backspace to just artifact that image, I can then draw a new zone over this text content. And if I change the zone source to OCR, I can then press convert to text, and convert to text will actually run a process where it will look at the image that I've taken here of this zone, and it's going to process it and try to establish exactly what is inside of it in terms of usable, selectable, searchable text. My OCR engine seems to be sluggish this morning. It could be an internet connection problem, but once it's done processing, it will give me a block of actual usable, searchable, selectable text that can be read aloud by a screen reader. The other things that I wanted to fix were the Joe Smith. So I'm just going to press the break lines feature, and the Bob Jones, I'm also going to press the break lines feature. So when I go back to the HTML preview, you'll notice the difference where these will actually be read more reflective of how they are positioned in the document itself. And then everything else is kind of lining up in this page. So other than my reading order, which needs to be addressed, if you remember, I've created this zone manually. So this manually created zone, I have to place in the correct location in the reading order. It actually belongs underneath this heading. So I can fix this very quickly. This is right now reading zone 17, and I need it to come right after reading zone 7. So what I'll do to fix this is if I just put a 7 and a period in front of the 17, that will make it 7.17. And now I can actually line up the reading order using the decimal system. So it will be read in the exact order that I expect. And this page is pretty much good to go. There's really nothing else that I need to consider here. So once I'm satisfied with that page, I can save it and close out. And I'm able to confirm that work that I'm doing over here in my HTML preview. So this is sort of a replacement or a supplement to Acrobat's accessibility checker to know that you actually have produced a good document with good structure that is going to be very compatible with screen reading technology. Now, I also want to take a chance to explain the difference between a document like that, which was previously auto-tagged, to a document like this, which actually came from Microsoft Word 2010, in fact. And this is some sort of template that this company produces on a regular basis. So the template that produced this PDF could have been changed, passed around, edited over its 10-year life cycle, who knows how many times. But what you get now is this template that is producing tags automatically, but very cluttered and strange looking tags that are not going to be compatible with a screen reader at all. If you can tell, there's all kinds of overlapping, a big mess that we have on our hands here. But again, this is where Equidox's auto detection comes in handy, because when you use this zone detector, you can ignore those auto-generated tags from the template, and you can actually redefine the reading zones with that zone detector and give yourself this much cleaner starting point. So again, it's a matter of setting headings on a page like this. So if I just tap 1 and 2 on my keyboard, I can set those heading level 1s and heading level 2s. I also have this table here, so I'm just going to resize this zone. and tap T on my keyboard to change the zone to a table. And I can then open up the table editor. And when I move these sliders around, I can, again, just similar to the last document, I can detect this table very quickly and produce a nice, clean, usable table. Whereas before, it would have just been reading all of this data in a randomized reading order, which would be utterly useless for a screen reader user who is trying to interact with this element. So once I'm satisfied with how that table looks, I can save it and close out. And all of those individual text zones that were there previously that were covering up the individual cells they've been overridden by that table zone. Now, the other thing to consider is this logo up here, which does require an alt description, unless you choose to artifact it, of course. You can add an alt description over here in this text field. So if I just type in the name of the company and logo, that will indicate that this is in fact an image of a logo for this company. But when I look at the full preview, I'm pretty satisfied with how this document looks. We took something that when I arrived just a moment ago in this page, there would be very little for me. There would be almost no elements that were in this document that were usable by a screen reader. Now I've actually set something up that is going to be perfectly usable for a screen reader user, and this page will read in a nice, clean, accessible way. And you're able to use this HTML preview to confirm that work. And if you can tell, it does not take all that much effort. It's really just a matter of kind of understanding the basics of what you're trying to accomplish and using the techniques and the tools that are within Equidox to build something like this, which is now perfectly accessible, perfectly usable. There are other little bells and whistles and tricks that we can show in the document editor. For example, stuff like this in the very bottom margin, the prepared date or the title of the document. This type of information can be redundant, and it can be something that spreads across every page. Now, this is only a 4-page document, so I could always remove these zones manually if I'd like to. I can also use this other technique called the ignore zone. So if I draw a zone that's just intersecting with those elements, if I press I on my keyboard, and if I go back to the HTML preview, I'll see that content has been artifacted. So when you have information like that is actually just redundant and kind of repeating itself on every single page, that does not necessarily need to be tagged, but the ignore zone will artifact all of it. And when you move on to subsequent pages in the document, you'll notice that the ignore zone is already down there waiting for me. So even if I use my zone detection slider, that ignore zone is there to wipe out those things like the prepared date or the title of the document. It's going to artifact those automatically. So there's a lot of little techniques and tools in Equidox that are all about designing a workflow to be very efficient with your time and how you are addressing the inaccessible documents within your organization. This is a productivity tool. PDF remediation can be very slow and tedious and technical, and something that requires a ton of training and a ton of experience if you're using manual tagging tools. With Equidox, we have this really nice combination of automation as well as the ability to quickly interact with individual pages and make those more nuanced adjustments to make sure that you are in fact producing not only a compliant document, but a fully usable document that a screen reader user can open up, interact with, and they're not going to be calling your office complaining that your website is full of documents that they can't access and interact with. Now, I'll also show you a document here. Now, this document, this yellow flyer, is another very standard looking PDF, but this document had no existing tag structure. So whatever happened to this document over its life cycle, it was produced from some sort of platform that did not give it any tagging. And when you open it up in Equidox, you'll notice that there's already these yellow zones waiting for me. So Equidox, when we import the document, is auto detecting where the content is. So in a way, Equidox has its own sort of auto tagging feature built in, but it gives you the option as the remediator to go in then and make those more nuanced adjustments, as I mentioned before. So setting things like your headings, interacting with list items such as this. So it's giving you this starting point of detecting the content, and you'll notice that it's a very neat detection. So it's not giving you that overlapping, strange reading order, all kinds of issues that are, kind of littering the page. You have a pretty clean starting point so that you can go in and make further adjustments. If you're not satisfied with that starting point, you always have that zone detector to kind of redefine things. So you can change that sort of that initial auto detection level if you want to. But when you're working with documents that were not previously tagged, Equidox's auto detection of that data is usually very much spot on and does not typically require any adjustments other than maybe manually setting things like your headings and your lists and your tables. Just to show you a quick difference, if I look at the HTML preview for how this page currently looks, it looks pretty good. It's pretty reflective of what the source PDF looks like. But if I move like the detection slider all the way to the right, you'll notice that I just now have one big kind of clumpy paragraph zone over the entire page, and the HTML preview will reflect that. So think of this HTML preview as a validation tool or as something that's just giving you feedback as you work through the document. Even if you're not an accessibility expert, you can very easily understand that something that is going to be read just as one big clumpy paragraph for a page like this is not going to work for an end user. So it's important to go back into the zone detector and to just give yourself that better starting point so that you don't have as many adjustments to make to the page. Just to kind of finish this thing off, if we just go through these adjustments, I'm going to just create this as my heading level 1. So again, I'm just drawing one zone. I'm going to consolidate and just create that as a heading 1 by tapping 1 on my keyboard. I will change this to a heading level 2 by tapping 2. This is an image, or I'm sorry, this is a list if we remember. So if I just hit L on my keyboard and I move my detection slider, that will define the 3 individual list items. I also have this image up here, so I'm going to fix this by typing in a description for it. So this is the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. And I misspelled bureau, so I can just quickly do the spell check on that. And then just for example's sake, let's artifact this little sort of watermark or background image down below. And if I save this and close out of the document, what I'll do is I'll go to the Output tab just to show you how to finish things off. If I go to the Output tab, I can choose to export this document as either HTML, PDF, or EPUB. Now, if I choose to keep this as a PDF, nothing will visually change about the document. And Equidox is applying some accessibility checks to the logic that I think I forgot to save my page after I deleted that zone. So I do get this little error message letting me know that, hey, I forgot to type in a description for an image. So I can go back in and fix that if I need to. But the point is that when you are exporting the document, you will get a pop-up of that document, which doesn't look visually any different than the source file. But Equidox is applying some of those high-level accessibility checks for you to make sure that you haven't made any glaring errors or logic errors in terms of heading structure or forgetting to tag an image with a description, as I did. So you are getting that sort of high-level accessibility check when you're exporting the file. But Equidox does not alter or change your PDF from a visual standpoint. All you are going to get from Equidox is that tag structure that is reflected in the HTML preview. So as you're checking that HTML preview, you are going to be producing tags that match up, that are, again, invisible to the naked eye, but they are there in the back end of this document to be compliant, to be accessible, to be usable for end users who are interacting with your content with assistive technology. Now, there's just about a moment left that we have scheduled. Tammy, I'm not sure if there's any questions or if Tom has anything that he would like to wrap up with in terms of like final closing thoughts.
There was one question, but I believe I have answered it. So
okay,
good to go.
Great. And as Tom mentioned before, if anyone on this webinar today would like to see a more specific demonstration of Equidox or to chat more in depth about how Equidox could slot into your workflow and how it could be applied to your documents, please feel free to reach out, or I'm sure Tom will follow up with everyone. But we do demonstrations all the time, so we're more than happy to chat and to go over any of your more specific questions, or perhaps incorporate more of your team members who may be interested in checking out the Equidox software.
Perfect. Thank you, Dan. And one other thing, just to note to the group, we do have a blog coming out actually next week that's discussing the topic of auto tagging. If you want to again learn more about kind of where that's at and what Equinox, how we kind of separate ourselves there. And then there is a webinar on August the 18th, I believe, that's also going to follow through on that topic. So we have monthly webinar topics that we do, and we'd love to have you join us there as well. So look forward to catching up with you all. Thank you for taking the time to join us this morning.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.